You talk about system 1 and system 2 thinking. Is it Dr. Daniel, is it Kahneman?
Yes.
Is how you pronounce
Yeah.
it? He's like the OG of your space. He's released the landmark papers and stuff initially that kind of got the ball rolling on.
Yeah, so he has a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a bestseller. It's actually interesting on Kindle because even though it's a bestseller, people rarely get past about page 30 because it's a really, really big book. And the way it's written is really towards academics rather than towards kind of making it readily accessible for a general audience.
Good title.
It's a good title, and in it, the lessons are really good. So it basically talks about our 2 thinking styles, one fast and one slow. Fast is system 1, and that's when you're on unconscious. You're not paying attention. It's your gut feeling. You're making lots of decisions. And the other is very, very slow, very, very deliberate. And I guess I'll ask you all, how much time do you think in your waking hours that you spend in your fast brain, where you're unconscious, you're making decisions without really weighing up costs, benefits, and risks?
I reckon it's going to be like high 90s. You know, I think I'd imagine there's probably 1% of my day where I actually think about what I'm doing. No, seriously. Really? No, I mean, apart from today, but you know, a lot of it is routine, isn't it?
Yep.
I'm getting up out of bed. I'm doing all of my daily activities.
Yeah.
Even when I'm like editing a video, there's a flow state there that is I'm not necessarily aware of what I'm doing.
Yep.
I drive a car. I drive for an hour. I don't even know where I've gone.
Sometimes I'm like, how did I get here? And I'm just driving along.
You should be focusing there, but actually, like.
Especially on the motorway,
I've been planning a YouTube channel. Do you know what I mean?
I switch out.
Yeah, so I would say 90% of the time.
Yeah, so I mean, you're spot on. So it's between 80 and 95% of the time we're unconscious. We're not necessarily paying attention to what we do. And that's why habits become so important. And that's why paying attention to where your attention goes is so important. So what are you actually paying attention to? So, you know, if I was out in the street today and somebody rudely overtook me in my car, do I react? Do I give that a lot of attention, or am I able to kind of brush that off and go about my day? Am I giving attention to the things that matter? You know, the content for the YouTube today, so that the audience actually gets something useful out of it. So everything kind of in chapters 2, 3, and 4 in the book are really taking, you know, for granted that we do spend 80 to 95% of our time in this kind of habit-driven mode. And what are the habits that you're doing for today to show up for yourself now, but more than that, to show up for your future self, which is someone who we forget. So you'll think of each other, but you won't think about yourself in 5 years' time necessarily. Whereas what I want people to do is to think about their future self as a sister or a brother in a way that they invest in them and that they set them up for success.
There was an exercise of a list, 5 years back and 5 years forward.
Yes.
Can you just explain that? Because I think this is kind of leading off what you were just saying.
Yeah, so it can be cool to go into a room and to ask people on one side of the room to write down the changes that they made in the last 5 years and how they don't necessarily recognize themselves today. And then on the other side of the room to ask them, what are the changes that you're going to make in the next 5 years that will actually change who you'll be in 5 years' time? And what's really interesting, and I do this with people who are at the London School of Economics in executive classes, so want to make a change in their lives, you get very little answers for 5 years in the going forward, but you get lots of answers for 5 years in the past. And there's 2 ways to think about that. Either our past selves are overachievers and our future selves are underachievers. But I think what more likely happens is we don't plan what changes we're going to make, so we get dragged. So if you're in a job, your manager will probably push you in some way and you might go along with that. If you're in a marriage, maybe your spouse pushes you towards something and you go along with that. But we're not planning enough. And because we're not planning enough, we're not putting in habits that allow us to actually end up where we want to be. So for me, when I think about the 5 years forward, I want people to actually say, yeah, in 5 years, I'm going to be X, which is really different to what I am now. And it's going to be different because I'm going to love my job more and have more financial security. And these are the small things that I'm going to do in the next 5 years. And I'm going to show up for myself every week, 90 minutes a week at a minimum, to make sure that I head towards that.
So what's the significance of moving from the fast system 1 to the thinking slower system 2?
So I think in the long run, you don't want to do that because we spend 80 to 95% of our time in system 1 for good reason. Being in system 2 is really, really draining. So you're going to feel quite exhausted if you constantly want to leverage your conscious mind, and you're probably not going to be able to do it. What I want people to do when it comes to their career is to think about what's the big goal that they have. And then using system 2, sit down and deliberately say, what are the habits that I need to put in place in order to get there? And then you consciously make sure that you show up for those habits, maybe for a week, 5 weeks, depending on who you are. But eventually they're back in your fast brain, in your system 1. And I think the important thing as well for the listeners is that they don't think just because you're in your system 1, you're making bad decisions and you're doing bad things. Once you have good habits, actually, you're much better off in your system 1. Things will happen for you. But system 2, people really credit with being the smartest brain. And that's because we are slowed down. We get the closest to weighing up our costs, benefits, and the risks. There's a new literature emerging that talks about gut feeling. And that's what happens in system 1 in the fast brain. And in some situations, like if you're being chased by a bear, your system 1 will absolutely be the best friend that you could possibly have. So for me, I don't say one is better than the other. I just want people to slow down, use their slow brain to create habits that ultimately set their fast brain up for success.
And they become system 1 habits.
They become system 1, and you forget about them. So, you mentioned kind of going to the gym, and it sounds like you go to the gym pretty regularly. For you, that's a no-brainer. There's somebody down the street who's struggling right now about whether or not they will go to the gym
on the other side of his table
system 2. I didn't want to presume. But yes, so you can kind of think about, if we compare our habits, we either set ourselves up for success or failure. And to get better habits, we do need to slow down. And then hopefully we move forward.
If, like me, you need to make big changes in your life, check out this episode with Dr. Grace Lorden.